When it all goes wrong and your wing is unrecoverable, or you're just running out of height, then throw your reserve.
Throw your reserve. Throw your reserve.
Having said that, there are a lot of things you need to know to ensure you walk away unharmed. This red handle is your best friend. I often give mine a reassuring pat before I take off. You must pull the reserve out of the harness the way it was put in. If you pull it 180 degrees across your lap, then it can get trapped, and handles have been ripped off because of the force of a panicking pilot. Look, locate, grasp, pull and throw. And when you're throwing a reserve, you must make sure you pull the handle out the way you put the bag in. That's the critical piece. It comes out the way it slides in, and then you give it a healthy throw behind you, away from you. And then the reserve will open, whoomp, nice reassuring pull of angels. The main will dive forwards, reacting against that. You pull that in, you get everything you can in, and you descend only under your reserve. Many pilots describe the opening of the reserve as delayed and rather gradual, but you only have a few seconds to depower your paraglider before it takes on a life of its own and starts to fly against the reserve and fast towards the ground. So the key thing is get the main in quick and use that dive to your advantage, so that as it dives forwards and goes slightly below you, then pull on the front A's and do a massive symmetric tuck. Then as the glider flies up past you, not inflated, you just grab all the loose lines and pull everything until you have the glider almost in your hands and non-reactive against the reserve. Once you've got the main under control and not flying, then it's time to get yourself sat up and get into the parachute landing position. And if you're landing in water, then just before you touch down, it's a good idea to just release the main so that it doesn't engulf you as you go in. The wind is dragging me and it's only a light breeze. A stronger wind would pull me right under. Here's a good example of a pilot ditching in the water in stronger winds. You can see the reserve staying open and starting to pull him. If that was any stronger, he would actually be pulled slightly under the surface of the water, and it'd be very hard for him to pull against the bridle and get the reserve down. And what it does is it keeps the pilot just under the surface of the water. You can't reach anything, the bridle, anything. It's pulling you along, drowning you. So you must make sure if you do any reserve deployment, you've got a rescue boat and it's not windy. If you are being dragged or dunked underwater, you can depower it by pulling the lowest line first, the ones closest to the surface of the water. Keep pulling them in, arm over arm, and progressively that snuffs the life out of the chute. So to recap, the parachute only opens properly when it's fully extended, so give it a big hard throw. The time invested in throwing it out is time saved in the actual opening speed of the parachute. Pull the A's in and do a big symmetric tuck as the glider dives forwards, and if they're too strong, then pull the C's, or failing that, pull both the brakes together. Have a look at some more reserve throws from our plucky Aussie friends again.
He's in the drink.
This is a good example of a pilot pulling in the A's instantly before it can start to downplane. And this is what a downplane can do, completely overpowering the reserve at a shocking speed. On land, this would result in a serious injury.
That's a big hit.
And here's a reserve test that Alan did. With no attempt to bring in the main canopy, it downplanes immediately, and the two opposing forces struggle against each other, and the descent rate is even faster. The instruments on that flight recorded over 14 meters a second descent rate. It's absolutely vital you get the main in. That's the game. Don't think, oh, I've got the paraglider and the parachute together, they're working like Apollo 13, because it won't. What will happen is three things. Either the main will downplane and fly against the parachute and make it fly at the ground much faster, twice the descent rate, like that. Boof! Not good. The other option is it starts to fly sideways, whoomph, and rotating like that. That's normally when you've got a few twists and a cravat, and it rotates like that with you in the middle. That's not good either. And the other one is it bashes into it and starts stopping the reserve from working, and then you've got two useless gliders dropping you down. So the most important thing to do is get the main in, whatever means, whether it's diving, pulling a front collapse and pulling anything you can, whether it's C's or B's or brakes, but whatever you do, get the main in and descend just under the reserve parachute. With high velocity turns, the reserve deploys quickly, but with slow negative spins, it can limply hang around and drift up into the paraglider's lines. If you are locked into a slow rotation, then research has shown a good place to throw your reserve is towards your feet. This makes sure that the parachute is thrown to the outside of the rotation. Once established in a nosedive, the A's may be too hard to pull, so go for the C's, pulling them both hard in, and then hand one side to one hand, slide your hand up and pull in more, slide your hand up and pull in more, and eventually get the main down, which will help stabilize and minimize your descent rate. If you're going to pull the brakes, then treat it like a stall and really haul the glider clear of the reserve. A little brake or feeble beelining will only worsen the downplane as it feeds it with more lift. While you're hauling in the main, make sure you keep an eye out for the ground and always be ready to do a parachute landing roll. If you do find yourself low and in a spin or deep stall, then you can consider holding that on and piloting it to the ground, as a deep stall has a similar descent rate to a reserve, but without the added complication of the glider shooting and diving during a deployment. Reserve deployments are great. I've thrown 3 in anger and umpteen testing and playing around with them, but the reserve will look after you a whole lot better if it's properly fitted. In my experience, about 10% of reserves checked at repacks show potential for a malfunction. For example, like something as simple as a bridle attachment. This is my parachute, the yellow gin, and so it comes from the bridle. It's attached from the parachute to the harness with a proper bridle, and it's attached with a proper 7mm nylon, which is thick and will easily take the load, but it's quite narrow and minimises the movement of the nylon sideways. Okay, so that's a good way of having it. Alright, I'll show you a bad example. Over here. Come on, Martin, come on! You must see it for the safety of the public! Okay, and here is a sort of same nylon, okay, but if you have it loose, what happens is it can move, and whilst it's in your harness, and it can go like that and make the tension and the weak point here, okay, which isn't perfect, okay. It's still better than being attached nylon to nylon, but it's better if you can minimize movement and have either an O nylon or something to keep it straight, and make sure that you stop any movement there, okay. Randy's repacked thousands of reserves, and this is how she attaches the O-ring.
Put in the O-ring like this and make a half twist. I put the bridle inside the O-ring and into the maillon, and after I closing the other side of the maillon. So the O-rings are for to avoid sliding of the bridles, so it stays better on the maillons. This is one of the better solutions we have. It's important not to over tighten the maillon. So what we do is to screw it with the finger until it stops, and then take a quarter turn to tighten.
But another bad thing people do is this is even worse, is they attach nylon to nylon. They put this lark's footed through this one. Okay, so nylon to nylon, when you take a massive shock opening, a massive cravat, whizzing down, spiraling, out goes your reserve, for laugh, the parachute opens, bath. It's nylon to nylon, massive friction, that burns, away goes the reserve, and down you go. So you've got to have this metal. Okay, that's important, but get the metal right and make sure there's minimal movement between the two. Where the reserve is attached is just as important. The pilot should ideally be attached at the highest suspension point on the shoulders on specially manufactured harness reserve loops, ensuring the pilot remains vertical and in the best position to do a parachute landing roll. If you mount the reserve on the normal carabiners, then you run the risk of being forced in a sitting position, which isn't great for a hard and fast landing. In contrast, tandem reserves should be mounted on the central flying attachment, which would bring down both the pilot and passenger at the same level as each other, giving both parties the best chance possible. Here, Chris and John selflessly demonstrate what would happen if you threw a tandem reserve with it mounted on the tandem pilot's harness. You can see the clear throw and steady deployment at normal flying speed. Having quickly released the main, they immediately are suspended on top of each other. Look at the position of poor John, the passenger, in relation to Chris. His head is level with Chris's manhood, and as well as being awkwardly intimate, it is incredibly dangerous for both parties. Here, in relatively benign conditions, the descent rate is at least 5 meters a second. But can you imagine coming down in this position in strong thermic wind and over land? In that hanging position, both pilot and especially the passenger would sustain life-threatening injuries. Fortunately for Chris, he's already spawned his 3 lovely sons and doesn't need functioning crown jewels. But I wouldn't like to land on the ground at that speed with anyone on top of me. Even during this demonstration, our brave passenger John hurt his back and shoulders despite the smiles. It is vital you think the whole process through and visualize the pull, angle and forces when the reserve opens and eventually deploys. Where will you hang on your descent, and will you be safe? So now we are happy with the attachments, our final demonstration is to compare the 2 additional techniques for neutralizing the wing while under your reserve. So I'm going to demonstrate the C riser technique of pulling in your main if the A risers are already too resistant. And Chris is going to demonstrate the hauling in of the brakes technique. So, firm throw, and the reserve only has to have filled behind me, and I'm already hauling in the C risers. Now the canopy is neutralized, and I can easily pull in the C risers to stop it bashing into the reserve and descend smoothly under both canopies. Because with the C risers safely in, it acts like a parachute. Compared to this, the B lines are much higher maintenance because they require a bit more force to pull in, and then you are stuck restraining them all the way down. If you weaken and let go, the glider reverts straight into downplane mode. On the other hand, here comes Chris. As his reserve inflates, he pulls down on the brakes, which do leave the glider fully extended at the same height as the reserve. So he has a bit more work to do to get it down and out of the way of the parachute, but it's perfectly manageable. Once fully pulled down, you can see that Chris's wing is flapping around like a flag, offering very little resistance to the air, whereas my C-line, with its bigger surface area to the airflow, enables me to have a gentler descent rate. You see, my hair doesn't even get wet on splashdown, whereas Chris's does, if he had any. If in doubt, throw it out. There is no minimum altitude to try it, because descending under a reserve is always preferable to a runaway wing. Plus, a reserve ride is a great thing to do, and you become a member of a very exclusive club.
Oh, that was fantastic. So you can see the two differences between the two reserve deployments. Mine, I pulled the sea risers. It was a nice easy reserve, the 1G, and it was quite stable and easy. It was a nice smooth slow descent rate. And then Chris went for brake lines, and he pulled them in, twisted, pulled them in more, twisted more, and you could see it coming in and having very little effect on the parachute, coming down vertically. It was thrashing around, and it does keep the pilot occupied quite a lot because he's got his hands moving all the time. But you can see they're both good ways of stopping the glider from bashing into the parachute, and also the worst, downplaning.